Hello, what is going on, everyone? Welcome to the very first episode of the brand new Mind, Body, Future podcast. I'm your host, Kane, and if you are unfamiliar with me, I am a music producer, label head, DJ, artist, and music journalist, presenter, and every other sort of title one can have. And this is something I've been wanting to do for the past 2 years. So, what is it? Well, for those of you that are unfamiliar, mindfulness is a growing movement around the world, and I've been practicing it for the past 6 years or so. So, in my musical journey, have discovered many other like minded individuals who also practice mindfulness, and not even just in music, but just in my daily life. And it's very close to my heart, and I love talking about it. So I figured, why not start a new podcast about it? So what is this podcast going to be? Well, to put it simply, Mind, Body, Future is a community-driven podcast focusing on mindfulness and mindfulness techniques. And it is aimed at helping us gain control over our minds, our bodies, and thus our futures. So, what I'm going to do is quickly kind of give a little rundown as to what you can expect from this podcast, as well as a brief intro into mindfulness. This is my third time trying to record this podcast, and the other two were like 40 minutes of rambling about what this podcast is going to be. But I figured instead of doing that, why don't we just get straight into the meat of it and just get things going right away? So, a little bit about this podcast. As I said, it's a community-driven podcast, which means that there are going to be guests from all different walks of life, different stages in their mindfulness journeys with different practices. And each guest is going to discuss their various methods and how it has helped them, and just their journey so far. Coming from the music industry, there will be quite a few music industry friends, although this is not a podcast about the music industry. I'm just using that as a platform, and eventually hopefully bring in gaming, sports, and all kinds of different things, business, everything, because mindfulness is a topic that, or a practice, I should say, that transcends any specific genre or area of expertise. It is a um, practice that anybody can get into at any age. And yeah, so each episode will feature best practices, guided meditations, various exercises, interviews, and something different, journal entries. And within those journal entries, there are going to be days where I discuss, or my guests discuss, the good days and the bad days. And the bad days are not to sort of seek pity or woe is me. It's quite the opposite. It's more of a, hey, look, this is how I'm feeling. This is how I handled this situation. And yeah, perhaps my way of handling it or thinking about it could help someone else. Because, there are a lot of people that are still not comfortable talking about how they feel. And just hearing someone talk about how they're feeling, if it's in a negative way, can be very therapeutic. So, yeah, it's going to be real, raw, and sort of uncut, because I think that's a really important thing, especially when you're talking about something like mindfulness. And vulnerability is a huge, huge component of mindfulness. And of course, like I said, guest hosts. So, yeah, guests will host their own episodes, like guided meditations and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, going to be really exciting. Each episode will also feature a new topic and will include a simple and effective little exercise at the end for you to implement in your own daily lives. And I want to keep them as simple as possible because, as we progress, we might get into some more advanced stuff. But um, to get things started, I think it's important to just kind of ease people into it because there's a lot of different ways that you can go with this and it can get overwhelming. So, let's just keep things as simple and straightforward as possible. So podcast lengthwise, I have another podcast that's a long format interview podcast, and I love doing those. And this isn't necessarily going to be long format, but there's not necessarily going to be a time frame. Generally, I'm going to aim for 30 to 60 minutes per episode, but some episodes might be shorter, some episodes might be longer. It just depends on the flow. So yeah, I'm not going to force anything because, again, that's important. I don't want to rush and I don't want to drag. So, yeah. So what is Mind Body Future? Well, as I kind of alluded to earlier, the goal of this is for us to gain control over our minds, our bodies, and thus our futures. So the name, a little bit more in depth, this might seem a little out there for some people, but trust me when I say that, with enough time and effort, it is possible that we are always able to gain control over our minds, our bodies, and our futures. And the sooner that we're able to do so, the sooner we can truly start living life the way that we want, and not only that we want, but that we deserve to. So, it's a very hot topic, I guess you could say. Some people might disagree, but it is true. And we'll get into this a little bit more. But there's a quote from one of my favorite authors named Stephen Pressfield, who wrote some amazing books. Two of the most important ones were The War of Art and Turning Pro, which, if you are in the creative field and you have not read these books, I cannot recommend them enough. Just get them right now and read them. First read War of Art, then read Turning Pro. Just absolutely essential reading. And even if you're not in the creative field, they're just essential books to have in your arsenal. So here's the quote, and I think that this quote goes perfectly along with the theme of this podcast. So the quote is, "Never forget, this very moment we can change our lives. There was never a moment, and never will be, when we are without the power to alter our destiny. This second, we can turn the tables on resistance. This second, we can sit down and do our work." So if you're in the creative industry, the word resistance will be uncomfortably familiar. But resistance does not just have to be about creative work. Resistance can be resistance to changing your habits, to changing your thought patterns, to changing everything. Resistance permeates everything. It's why people, go back on their New Year's resolutions. Diets fail, exercise plans fail. Everything fails because resistance gets the best of most of us. And there's not one person on this planet that doesn't have to deal with this battle every single day. Some people are better at dealing with it, but resistance is something that, again, everybody deals with. So this is not easy. You know what I mean? Beating resistance and gaining control over your mental, physical, and emotional states is not easy at all. But like I said, with enough practice, it is possible. And it is not easy, but it is absolutely essential. And if we are to take control of our own destiny and stop living in both reaction and in lack, deep down, we know that we are the ones who are causing our own turmoil, right? It's easier to place the blame on our circumstances, on outside forces, than it is to take responsibility for our own actions, whether that be emotional, physical, or mental health. You know what I mean? And again, some people will try and argue this, but really, we all know that we are the ones who are in charge. That being said, the responsibility that comes with accepting that you are, you know, the one that's in charge, it's a lot. It's a lot to bear. And that's why a lot of people don't, I wouldn't say a lot of people, I'd say most people are living in a reactionary state, are living in a non creative state. So, we'll get more into this, but let's talk about mindfulness itself. What is mindfulness? Mindfulness is described as a mental state achieved by focusing one's awareness on the present moment while calmly acknowledging and accepting one's feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations, used as a therapeutic technique. That's a long-winded answer, but a very accurate one. However, I'm not so keen necessarily on the therapeutic technique. I mean, it is, but while it is therapeutic, I personally think that mindfulness is more than simply a way to fix a problem. It's more of a way of living that actually allows you to remain in control over yourself and your mental and emotional states. So, you know, again, therapeutic kind of implies medicine or like a procedure or some sort of way to fix an ailment. But mindfulness is not a drug. Mindfulness is just simply a way of being. And when you are able to gain control over your mental and emotional states, you switch over from living in reaction, in lack, in defense, or in survival mode, as some call it, to living in a state of creation, abundance, and control. What does that mean? Well, um, we've all, you know, we've all done and said things that we regret and placed the blame on other people. But you've heard the term "be a grown up," right? And accept your actions, right? The consequences. So here's an example, right? So you get into an argument with someone, you lose your temper, and say something you end up regretting, or doing something you're regretting, right? Maybe you break something or whatever. That might be a little extreme, but still, you know what I mean? You just do something that you end up regretting. And when living in a reactive or defensive state, if asked what happened, chances are you will place the blame of losing your temper on something that the other person that you were arguing with said or did, right? Well, she said this, so that's why I said this, or that's why I did this, right? But, you know, when you practice mindfulness, when you start to recognize this person is saying something that you disagree with, right? You're able to acknowledge the negative emotions that are starting to rise, and you are then able to more or less take the necessary actions to prevent yourself from losing your temper. So you start disagreeing with someone, you start to feel yourself getting heated, your body starts to tense up a little bit, and you say, "Oh wow," you take a second and say, "Wow, I'm my body is starting to tense up. I'm starting to get kind of warm. I feel my hands starting to sweat a little bit. I'm getting a little anxious, a little angry here, right?" And when you're able to acknowledge that, you're able to kind of put a stop to it, right? Say, I recognize that I am feeling this way. Why am I feeling this way? I disagree with this person. And if I continue to stay in this situation, it could lead me to saying or doing something that I regret doing. So the sooner that you're able to acknowledge and recognize these emotions starting to come on, right? The sooner that you're able to take yourself out of that situation or completely diffuse the situation and prevent yourself from saying or doing something that you regret. So, this is certainly easier said than done, but again, with enough practice, it is possible. And I will tell you from firsthand experience that, when you're able to do this, you walk away from these types of situations feeling so relieved, right? Because especially if you're in an argument with your significant other, right? And you say something that you regret, you feel terrible, right? You just feel bad. You're like, why did I say this? Then they feel bad. And it's just this awkward, I got to apologize because I said this. And I obviously didn't mean it, but I was just so heated, blah, whatever, right? Like being able to prevent yourself from getting in those situations will greatly improve your life and your relationships in all situations, whether that's at work, at home, with your friends, wherever. It does not matter. And when you sort of cross over to the other side, right? When you start practicing mindfulness and you're able to sort of start really taking control of yourself and your emotions in these types of situations, um, it becomes instantly clear who is still, I guess you could say, asleep, right? Like who is still living in the reactionary world, in defense, in the sort of victim mindset. I use victim sort of carefully there, but it's very easy to see who is not practicing mindfulness. And a benefit of this is that when you're able to acknowledge that people are not practicing mindfulness, are not in control of themselves, right? They don't, in a sense, don't really know what they're doing. You can't take it personally, right? How can you take something personally if the person doesn't even know that they're doing it, right? So, yeah, that's we'll discuss that in another episode. But wanted to kind of talk about my own personal experiences and personal practices with mindfulness. So, as I mentioned, I've been practicing mindfulness for about 5 or 6 years. I got into it. How did I get into it? I specifically through a book by Eckhart Tolle called A New Earth. That book really sort of changed my life. Highly recommend that. And then started practicing meditation and these types of things. But that book specifically really sort of broke down the concepts of mindfulness and what it is and what it's not, and how to view it in a simple and approachable way. And since then, man, mindfulness is just, it's been my best friend. It's been there in my darkest moments, and it's shown me the true power of the mind and the body when everything's in sync. And maybe not more importantly, but equally as importantly, it's helped me really slow down and pay attention and just acknowledge the beauty that is in the world all around us, even to the smallest, most insignificant details. Um, an example would be when I go on walks. I start to pay attention to things like patterns in bark on trees, or colors of leaves, or various flowers, and just patterns in the sand, clouds in the sky, just little things that we take for granted. And as soon as you are able to start seeing these things, it's like you can't not see them. You know what I mean? And it makes you really appreciate everything. It's amazing. And that's, I want everybody to get to that state, because once everybody gets to that state, I mean, you know, humanity will change for the better, right? It has also helped me tap into what I call, and what many other people call, the source. What is the source? The source is the sort of cosmic energy that permeates everything, the entire universe, everything, right? Energy is finite, right? And where do we come from? In a very fluffy and fairy tale way, right? We are all stardust, literally. We came from particles that created the stars, right? And we get so wrapped up in our daily lives that we forget that everything is connected, right? When we die, regardless of whether or not you believe in an afterlife, our bodies break down, the energy is transferred back into the earth and the universe, and life continues, right? I've done this through meditation, breathing, um, journaling, yoga, uh, and walking through nature. Those are some of my personal things. The 3 things that I do every single day are read, meditate, and journal. I try to exercise, but reading uh, is not quite as mindful. Well, it is because, once you get wrapped up in a book, right, you're just so focused. That's essentially, um, you know, kind of mindfulness, I guess. It's a meditative practice in a sense. But yeah, meditation and journaling. And we're going to get more into this in other episodes and how to implement them, right? But, um, excuse me. I want to talk about a personal, profound experience that I had. And this took place pretty early on in my mindfulness journey. And it was one night I was meditating before bed, and I'd been meditating for about 20 minutes. And about 20 minutes is when you sort of start to break through, according to a lot of meditation experts and stuff. And breaking through, it's sort of when all the chatter and the static starts to go quiet, like really quiet, and you start to enter what I call the void, which is this sort of eternal blackness and stillness of just nothingness. And that's the ideal state, right? Because then there's no distractions, no nothing, right? That's where you want to be. That's where all the answers come from. That's the ideal state. So I was meditating, and as I'm sitting there, right? And again, this is pretty early on in my meditation and mindfulness journey. So I was still fairly new to this sort of place, right? So I'm sitting there, and I start to notice some sort of movements coming from, I don't know, the infinite below me, right? Because it basically was like I was sitting in like this completely black box, and I could see below me and behind me. It's crazy. Was not on drugs, completely sober. If you've been meditating, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm sitting there, and again, I start to see some sort of movement, right? And this thing is starting to come towards me, and I keep looking, and I see that it's this sort of white ring of something, right? And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, kind of just like goes over me or around me, I guess. And then I start to see another one and another one. And they start to keep coming and coming and coming, and they get bigger and bigger and more intense. And I'm like, oh wow, what is this? This is crazy. Like I've never seen this before in my life. I'm again completely sober. I'm just like tripping, right? This is crazy. So I'm like, wow, these are like it's just like pure energy or something. I don't know. My body started to vibrate. I could feel the energy rising through the floor, in through my body, and out my head. And I was like, what is this? This is crazy. I've never heard of this. I've never experienced, like, what is going on? And the thing about being in the void, right, is that through the stillness, answers come to you, right? That's partially why people meditate, because if they're looking for answers, the silence allows the answer to actually come to us, right? To the question that we are trying to ask. So, wasn't necessarily trying to ask any questions at this point. I was literally just, in the practice of meditation. And all of a sudden, it dawned on me. It's like this is the cosmic energy that just flows through the universe. That's flowing through all living things. That is flowing through the earth. It's what makes the ocean move, volcanoes, everything, just everything. This was pure cosmic energy engulfing me, coming through the ground, through my body, out the top of my head. And it was, wow. It was honestly, it was insane. Again, this probably sounds crazy to people that have never experienced anything like this, but I assure you that if I was able to experience this, you can experience this too. And what I learned from this was that this is like I said, this is where the answers come from. This is my first time ever experiencing that sort of uh, call and response, I guess you could say, right? Where the question came to me as I was sitting there, which was, what is this? And then the answer came, this is life. This is pure energy. This is the universe. This is the cosmos. This is existence. And that taught me that everything is connected. That energy is just an infinite source. There is no, it's, I can't even, it's hard to even put it in words, but basically, I learned that if you are able to sit still enough, the answers will come to you. And you just have to sit there and be willing to listen, So, this wasn't going to be the longest episode. We're closing in on about 26 minutes here. And in closing, I wanted to leave you with a very simple and small practice to take with you until the next time we meet. And I forgot to mention that starting out, this podcast will be every other Sunday. And then once we start to get some momentum building, hopefully move into every Sunday. But starting out, keep it simple. I don't want to be rushed. I want to do this right. So every other Sunday. And what we can do is I'll do this. I'll leave you with this practice. And then if you want to message me directly on Instagram, my Instagram handle is at Kane Music, OFC, KaneMusicOFC. Let me know how this works for you. But here's the practice, right? What I want you to do is very simple. I want you to set a timer sometime around 12 to maybe 3 p.m. Just one timer. Set it for every day for a week, right? Or 2 weeks until we meet again. And I want you to label that alarm reflect. And this is what I want you to do. Every time that alarm goes off, I want you to pause whatever you're doing, unless you're obviously like in a meeting or something, but as soon as you're able to, I want you to pause, and I just want you to simply reflect and take stock or take note of how you're feeling mentally, physically, emotionally. I don't want you to change anything. I don't want you to try and change your state. I just want you to simply acknowledge how you are feeling. That's it. Because this is how you start to pay attention and notice the small details. How you, when we go back to that example of like when you're getting in an argument, right? You start to notice your body starts to tense up a little bit. When you're able to just simply acknowledge and take note of how you're feeling in all these different categories, then you can start moving on to more advanced practices of, preventing yourself from getting all riled up or getting anxious or this or that, right? But simply acknowledge how you're feeling mentally, physically, and emotionally. You can write this down. You don't have to. It's up to you. Well, that's it for this first episode. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with is remember what is happening. Let me try this again. Remember, no matter what is happening in our external world, we always, 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 at all times, have the ability to take control of our minds, our bodies, and thus our futures. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Really hope you enjoyed this. Please shoot me a message. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, and if you would like to get involved in the podcast. I'm really excited about this. I think this is going to be a really great experience, not just for myself, but for everybody. And one last thing, I want to make it very clear that I'm not an expert. I'm still learning, and that's partially why I'm doing this podcast, because they say that, when you teach someone something, or when you talk about something, you get better at it. So this is also to help me in my own journey. But I want us to do this together. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.